Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome to 7th Street.
Anything I bring you will be so fresh, get past the government meat inspector.
And welcome to another Top 5 installment. In the spirit of Halloween, I didn't have the chance to write a script, so once again, I'm just gonna sort of freeform this. It seemed to work out fairly well last time, so let's give it another shot. Today's Top 5 is 7th Street Productions' Top 5 Hammer films. And if you don't know what a Hammer film is, Hammer was a production studio in England that did, they're most known for horror films, but they did all sorts of noirs and detective films. But today we're going to concentrate solely on Hammer horror films. So let's get right into this. Number 5, Frankenstein Created Woman.
Frankenstein's most terrifying experiment comes to life. Frankenstein Created Woman.
So Frankenstein Created Woman is an interesting one. It's sort of a love it or hate it among the Hammer horror fans, and especially the Frankenstein Hammer horror fans. The story centers around this guy who's wrongly convicted for a murder, and he's sentenced to death. And as he's getting his head cut off, this disfigured woman who's sort of secretly in love with him sees that he's being executed for a crime that he didn't commit, and she commits suicide by jumping off this bridge. So in comes Dr. Frankenstein, who just happens to be he's working on transferring the soul from one body to the other by using a giant satellite dish, apparently.
Frankenstein. He shocks the world as he mocks the devil. Frankenstein. He creates monsters of men.
And apparently our souls look like rainbows. Anyhow, he fishes out the dead girl, he fixes her disfigurement, and he transfers the soul of her lover who is wrongly convicted into her. And she spends the entire film hunting down the guys who really committed the crime and killing them in all these different ways.
Hans! Kill him. Kill him. Kill him, Christina.
This is a really funny one. There are a lot of great lines of dialogue. Like about a year ago, my friend came over, my friend Josh, and he came in like right at this moment where they're like being mean to the girl, and there's this hilarious line where he like turns around and slaps her and he's like, "You silly bitch!" And that has just become like a saying that we use all the time now, is "you silly bitch." But this one's really weird because there's not a monster. It's more of this, it's sort of like Psycho in a way, where the girl, she like talks to her dead boyfriend's head. She's almost got a split personality. It's not so much of the guy's soul in her. But it's a funny one. It's got some really, really interesting ideas in it, and it's a lot different from any of the other Hammer Frankenstein sequels. So, that's why it makes my top 5. Number 4, Taste the Blood of Dracula.
Dracula's Blood.
This is another really interesting love it or hate it one among the huge fan bases, but I tend to really like movies that try something new. A lot of audiences don't necessarily want to see something new. They want just like a cookie cutter sequel. But this one's really interesting, mainly for Ralph Bates. Ralph Bates is probably the most underrated of the Hammer stars. So Ralph Bates plays this Satanist who's trying to recruit these people to perform this seance to bring Dracula back to life. And he ends up getting these like 3 aristocrat, kind of like rich bored guys to come and participate in this seance. And towards the end of the seance, these like rich guys, they chicken out and they end up leaving. And they actually kill Ralph Bates. Dracula still comes back and uses Ralph Bates kind of as a conduit to come back into the real world. And just kind of like a slasher villain, he goes around picking off these like rich aristocrats one by one. It's different for sure. It plays with the Dracula lore a little bit. I wasn't aware that you were able to resurrect a vampire, but apparently you are. But the reason this one makes the list is Ralph Bates. He's great. He plays the part so creepy. There's the scene where they're doing the seances like in this old like broken down church, and they're like cutting their wrists and bleeding into this cup of dried Dracula blood to like give it life, and he's just like screaming at them. He's like, "Drink it, you damn fools!"
You fools. You pathetic, spineless fools.
You drink then! You drink it! You drink the filth!
It's hilarious. It's got to be one of the better moments in Hammer history. Just that scene alone. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Number 3, The Lost Continent.
A living hell that time forgot on the Lost Continent.
So, this is obviously not necessarily a horror film. It's more of a science fiction, fantasy film. But it's that good that it should make the list. And it's another good Halloween one, actually. The story, it's pretty long. The movie is actually a lot longer than it needs to be. But the story is about this cruise liner with all of these rich people. I think there's like movie stars and singers. And they're on this cruise ship across the Atlantic, I think. And while they're out at sea, some different stuff happens. This guy's like smuggling explosives. But basically all you need to know is that they become shipwrecked on the Lost Continent, which is really just an island of seaweed, like really dense seaweed that they're not able to walk across without falling through. And on this seaweed are like giant crabs and scorpions. There's also this like giant one-eyed octopus that attacks them. And it's sort of like The Land That Time Forgot a little bit. It sort of follows the same thing with like the crew trying to rebel and take the ship back and all this stuff. But where the film really gets goofy is the main antagonists, the main villains of the film are like 17th century Spanish conquistadors that dress as KKK members. Obviously, they're totally KKK members. If you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. And they like have figured out that they can like walk around on the seaweed as long as they have like these giant inflatable balloons that like are pulling up on them that make them weigh less so they can walk across the seaweed. It's almost impossible to explain this film and explain why I like it so much. I mean, you essentially find yourself going, "Oh, it's the one with giant scorpions and balloon pirates." You know, it's a classic. Number 2, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed.
Excuse me, I didn't know that you were doctors.
Doctors? We're not doctors.
I beg your pardon, I thought you knew what you were talking about.
Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed probably should be number 1. I don't understand people that don't like this sequel. I feel like most of the Hammer community is pretty in agreement that this one is one of the best of the Frankenstein series. And to me, it's one of the best of the Hammer series in general. And the plot itself isn't that crazy. It's about Frankenstein he finds this couple who run this bed and breakfast, and he blackmails them because he figures out that they're selling cocaine on the side of running a sanatorium. But Frankenstein figures out that the sanatorium that this guy works at houses this old scientist colleague that he had who went insane. And Frankenstein is his new big thing is figuring out how to keep a brain alive, keep it functioning, because he's always using like decomposed brains in his monsters, so they always go crazy. And his old colleague was studying in that field, so his entire plan is to transfer his crazy colleague's brain into another body and somehow cure his insanity so he can help him with his experiments. And it's a really fun concept because Frankenstein is not only eluding the police, but he's also figuring out with this guy that he's blackmailing how to smuggle his friend out of the sanatorium. And when he does this, the wife of his colleague gets informed. Like, hey, your husband's gone. He was crazy, and now he's not in the hospital anymore. So Frankenstein, instead of like keeping this open investigation going, tracks down his colleague's wife and says, hey, yes, I did kidnap your husband, but I'm going to cure his insanity. And there's this really sad sequence of scenes where Frankenstein successfully transfers the brain into another body, but it's still her husband, so he keeps his face covered, and he's like, hey, I performed the surgery, but you can come see your husband. And he does like this series of hand gestures to let his wife know that he's cured, that he's fine. And then Frankenstein, like a badass, picks up his experiment and leaves town. And the wife hasn't heard from Frankenstein. She brings the police back, and they like find her dead husband under the floorboards, not knowing that his brain is still alive. It's a really sort of sad scene. And the whole ending of the movie is great. It ends with his colleague, who's now sort of the monster, taking revenge on Frankenstein and using Frankenstein's greed for knowledge to basically burn him alive at the end of the movie. It's really good. If you haven't seen this one, or if you've only seen it once and didn't think it was very special, watch it again. It's really well done. It's actually the only one of the Frankenstein series that I have on Blu-ray. Everything else I have on DVD. I forget who... One second. This is the Warner Brothers Blu-ray. Yeah, that's who released it. It's Warner Brothers. It's beautiful. It's really good. It's out right now. I would encourage everyone to go buy this Blu-ray. It looks fantastic. I used to watch it on an old VHS DVD rip, and when I saw it on Blu-ray, it blew my fucking mind. Go get it.
But if you wish to involve yourself in an argument about it, pray explain the word progress in this context.
You wouldn't understand it. But I will give you a parallel that you may just appreciate. Had man not been given to invention and experiment, then tonight, sir, you would have eaten your dinner in a cave. You would have strewn the bones about the floor, and then wiped your fingers on a coat of animal skin. In fact, your lapels do look somewhat greasy. Good night.
Number 1, The Horror of Frankenstein.
Prepare yourself for a new Frankenstein. Searing the screen with excitement.
I'm sure you could probably all see this coming. If you've watched my channel at all, you saw that my second episode of Reference This Film was The Horror of Frankenstein. I like this one. This is my favorite Hammer film by far and away. Probably just because of nostalgia reasons, to be honest. Back in the day, I know I say this all the time, but it's true. Back in the day, AMC used to have Fear Fridays and everything, and I would stay up with my VCR. I had cable in my room, and I'd just record horror movies that would play that night. Even if I fell asleep, I would get a VHS tape recorded on SLP and get about 6 hours worth. So I knew that I could get 3 movies on there. And I had this tape that became my prized possession, like my senior year of high school, definitely. I was in love with all 3 movies on this tape. It was The Undying Monster, which has also been on Reference This Film, The Horror of Frankenstein, and then The Scars of Dracula, which should get a shout out. Scars of Dracula is close, but we all know why Scars of Dracula probably isn't on here. But it's another nostalgic one for me. Anyhow, Horror of Frankenstein, everything about it I fell in love with. Ralph Bates plays Frankenstein. People don't like that it's a reboot. I always saw it as sort of a prequel. Maybe that'll change your opinion of it if you watch it as a prequel to Curse of Frankenstein. But he's fantastic once again, and he's really charismatic. He's like obviously good looking for the 70s too, and you can like identify with him. He kills his father in the beginning of the movie so that he can go off to college and then come back and keep studying, his creating life thing that Frankenstein's always obsessed with. But his father like has this 16-year-old housemaid, and Frankenstein keeps the 16-year-old housemaid, who's really played by like a 35-year-old. She's still hot, but she's definitely not 16. But he keeps her around and like...
Please, Victor. What do we want her here for?
For no other reason than common hospitality and good manners. Perhaps the latter are beyond your comprehension, Elise. I go to bed before I get angry.
I don't know. There was just something about the story, I guess. That it's like this young, cool guy, and he's like making monsters and stuff, and like all the girls in the town swoon over him. It's sort of taking everything you like about Frankenstein, the Frankenstein movies, like with the crude science and the monster and the cool mystery, but also adding sort of like this hip character that you can identify with. And as a 17-year-old, I could definitely identify with Ralph Bates more than I could identify with Peter Cushing. So it's really what opened up Hammer films for me. And it's really hard to find. I have it on DVD, but I had to order it on Amazon. It was like $50. It's definitely worth it. I know that some people out there really don't like it. Just give it another watch. It's got everything that you would want, and it's a little bit more light than some of the darker films.
Experimenting with the forbidden secret of life itself, molding his most terrifying creation.
Alright, that was 7th Street Productions' top 5 Hammer films. And I'm sure most of you guys are just foaming at the mouth right now because I had 3 Frankenstein films, only 1 Dracula film, and a science fiction Hammer film. So I'm sure you guys have a ton of hate comments to leave below. Make sure that you leave them. Let us know what your favorite Hammer films are, your favorite Hammer horrors, or even your science fictions. You know, I've sort of opened up the conversation. So if you guys are interested to see what my top 5 science fiction Hammer films would be, let me know below. Make sure that you find us on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe. We got all sorts of new cool stuff coming out that I'm going to cover in another video. Film festivals that some of our original films are going to play at. You can watch a new short film. Just a couple of playlists below this one. So stay tuned, guys.
It is fools like you who have blocked progress throughout the ages. You make pronouncements on half facts that you don't understand anyway.